And let's talk about another new issue that has arisen from the popularity of the internet and these various blog sites, etc. It's called scraping, and it's where someone takes content from someone else's site and puts it on their own site, sells ads against it, but might not properly attribute the information to the original site, or maybe they're not allowed to use it even with attribution because it's copyrighted or protected. And Dennis Neal knows a lot more about this than I do, so I'll stop trying to explain it and let him do it. Hi,
yeah,
Dennis.
because you mentioned the hippest phrase, that scraping, Patty Ann, but the most important thing is this is newspapers. This is revenge of the newspaper nerds. 20 years after America Online set off the online revolution and free newspaper content went up at thousands of sites, 20 years later, a new venture forms calling itself NewsRight. It has 29 newspaper companies that have invested in this venture. Another 30 have joined up. These 29 print partners, almost 900 websites. Now, they've got technology, a little bug, a little beacon they call it, they place on every story electronically so that they can track 16,000 websites that reach 160 million readers. And some of the partners in this are New York Times, Washington Post, Hearst, McClatchy, Scripps, AP. Gannett is not a partner. Why? Because Gannett, one of the largest newspaper companies in the country, Gannett has $400 million in online ad revenue. Gannett apparently has figured out how to surf that internet wave. Other newspaper companies have not, and now they have NewsRight. So here's the key thing, though, Patty Ann. Will NewsRight end up being a wonderful licensing center to make it really easy for websites to legally pay for content? Or will it be a tracker of illegal usage and then a newspaper takes it and starts to sue the way the music industry sued Napster? Now, so who's running NewsRight? David Weston, the former president of ABC News. Now, this guy became president of this venture back in April. They announced it only yesterday, its new name and what they're doing. He ran ABC News for 13 years up till 2010. And in his past life, he was a litigator at the Washington firm Wilmer Cutler. So here you've got this crackshot litigator and a TV News former president who's running this operation. Now, he insists, he tells the press, and I talked to him this morning on the phone. Right. Thank you, David Weston, for getting on the phone. He insists that they're not going to sue. But will they sue? He insists that, quote, "We have not been set up first and foremost as a litigation shop." But then he adds this. He says, now, that doesn't mean down the road there won't be litigation. Some people may decide to sue, and we can support that with the data we gather. So, Patty Ann, the test becomes this. Will newspapers, and I was a newspaper and magazine journalist for 25 years before I joined the dark side of television, will newspapers be smart enough, 20 years after this threat emerged, to not sue users, but to find a way to couple up with websites to get them to distribute their stories? Or will they instead do what the music industry did when they tried to sue Napster, sue Grokster, sue individual users even, and it never worked?
Yeah.
Yesterday news broke that music sales increased for the first time in 6 years, and that increase in sales was driven by digital, the very digital wave that had hurt the music industry. But iTunes helped the music industry, instead of practicing karate, helped them practice jiu-jitsu, surf the wave. iTunes lets me sell my songs. Well, so will NewsRight be the iTunes of newspapers, or will NewsRight instead be the karate approach and try to crush websites that use newspaper copy without permission? The problem is fair use. If you use only a few paragraphs, who's to say that you've really ripped off anybody? But more than that is when a little local newspaper gets a story on websites all over the world, its reach has been enhanced, its advertising value goes up. Should it really stop those websites from running the story at all?
But are they attributing it properly? Is that...
Well, the scraping, and now we come into your hip phrase of scraping.
Okay,
because
that's what
they're saying is that a Google News, they're great because they run and say, hey, this story came from the Washington Post. But when a site scrapes and acts like the story is theirs and doesn't prominently credit it, and maybe down at the bottom might say it came from the Washington Post or won't say so at all, that's scraping. That's what the newspapers want to go after.
Okay.
But let's admit it, okay? This industry is in crisis. It's profitable, but it's a third or less of the profits it used to have. They're doing this because they want to raise money. David Weston told me this morning that he wants to see NewsRight turn into a viable, separate company with a profit center. And he said in the same way that Apple set up iTunes to make it really easy for a consumer to order a song without breaking the law, NewsRight will set up an easy license terms, easy for a website to run thousands of stories without breaking the law. So will it be jiu-jitsu or will it instead be
karate? It's a fair question. We should emphasize here that News Corp, which owns Fox News Channel, is not one of the companies that has joined up with Newsright. But there are some broadcast entities, right? It's not just newspapers.
Oh, no, it's
right?
all newspaper companies so
It
far.
is all newspapers.
They haven't yet gone with magazines, and I asked Weston why a few moments ago when I talked to him, and he said, you know what, because then we got to get into photo rights. He said it was so hard, so we went just for text rights first. Right. Setting this up has been a monumental task. He did admit this. I asked him, though, don't you think newspapers should have done this maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago? He said, well, sure, but it's a hard thing to do and a hard thing to pull off.
Yeah, but I mean, you compared it to Napster and all that. I mean, at the end of the day, what people were doing was stealing the music and not paying for it. And, you know, and some of them would say, well, I would pay for it, but they're not asking for money. This is the only way to get it digitally, and I want it digitally. I want to put it on my MP3 player. And all they needed was somebody to come up with a system, and they were more than happy to pay.
But it's sad that it took Apple to come up with that instead of newspaper publishers.
Yeah.
See, newspaper publishers were so threatened by the online wave that they fought it in denial, and they're trying to keep it away instead of deciding, hey, it's happening, I got to find a way to surf it, and that's the problem. And with music, you know, they took the Grokster download case, that was an aftermath follower of Napster, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The music industry won that case after 250 million downloads already had gone out to 250 million people. You cannot win in court if you have 250 million people with the ability to download illegal songs. That's not the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same thing here, I guess. You know, you don't want people stealing the content. I mean, you've got journalists working hard to produce original news content.
That was the savviest and most touching thing Weston said to me this morning. He said, and he knows how to play to reporters. He said, one thing we need to make sure of is that these sites get paid so they can pay journalists. He said when he was at ABC News running that place, he had to cut the staff by 25%. He said these were talented people. They worked hard. They did a great job. But our economics no longer supported how many people we had doing what we were doing. We had to change it. He said that was painful for them. It was painful for me. I'm trying to come up with a way where newspapers can stop having to lay off people. Well, I wish them well in that regard.
And where these news organizations can get paid for every eyeball that is reading the original content that they produced instead of other people profiting off of it. All right. It's interesting. Dennis Neal, Fox Business Network, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the airtime.
All right. And thank you, David Weston, for speaking with Dennis. So, all right, we're going to leave it there.